Pulling off a successful jailbreak requires courage, cunning, and more than a little luck. Jails and prisons are built for security and staffed by people who are paid to make sure you don't leave until they say so. However, that doesn't stop people who possess none of the aforementioned qualities from taking their chances in the hopes of an early and unauthorized release. They're the ones who end up right back in the cell, with time slapped onto their sentences for their trouble, but at least they do us the service of providing a good laugh. These are prison escapes that failed horribly, attempted by people who really should have just stayed put. An unidentified man in Brazil had the misfortune not only of his escape attempt failing, but of looking really silly in the attempt and allowing the whole thing to be caught on video. The man was waiting in a holding cell to be booked on charges of robbing a jewelry store, something which he apparently wasn't really looking forward to. Rather than face justice, he opted to try the Winnie the Pooh method of exit by attempting to squeeze through a hole in a door that was obviously much too small for him. As if getting stuck in this precarious position weren't enough, he had stripped down to nothing but his purple underwear so that his clothes wouldn't get caught on the opening. Unfortunately, that just meant that his skin and bones got caught on the opening instead. After a long and painful struggle with chuckling firefighters wielding power tools, the man was eventually freed from his self-imposed trap, but not from jail. He'll probably be there for some time. In another case of genius escape plotting out of Brazil, William Alves was working in the kitchen in a city jail in the country's northeastern region when he concocted a brilliant plan. He would simply crawl into one of the kitchen's trash containers, cover himself up with some food and scraps, and wait until the receptacle was picked up for disposal, as they were every day. It actually doesn't seem like that far-fetched a plan, but there was a slight problem. The trash receptacle in question was not on the large side. It was in fact just barely big enough to hold Alves. Even though he managed to squeeze himself all the way inside, which must have been next to impossible, there was barely enough room left over to cover himself up with anything. And even if that part of the plan had worked, it's ridiculous to think that maintenance staff wouldn't question why this medium-sized trash can mysteriously would weigh as much as a full-grown man. The ploy was quickly discovered and Alves was hauled back to his cell, presumably trying to play the whole thing off as a joke all the while. Nobody wants to wind up in prison, and many who do spend their long days dreaming of escape. Some do more than dream, they actively plot it, and others are quick to take advantage of an opportunity to go AWOL if one presents itself. Of course, prisons and jails are heavily monitored places, meaning that a lot of brazen escapes have been caught on camera. Here are some of the more outrageous jailbreaks you're ever likely to see. A couple of inmates at Quebec's St. Jerome Detention Center also decided to take the dramatic way out. They had two friends hijack a helicopter at gunpoint, then force the pilot to land on the roof of the prison. The accomplices then dropped a rope down to the waiting inmates below, whose plan was to climb up to the chopper and make good their escape. It didn't exactly go as planned, mainly because scaling a wall using nothing but a rope is a lot harder than it looks in the movies. As seen in this video, the two inmates make it most of the way up, but then begin having trouble. They can even be seen having a chuckle at their situation in a few shots, but the accomplices begin to get frustrated as their pals just can't reach the roof. Rather than abort the operation, they improvise and simply take off with the two inmates still dangling from the rope. They actually made it to freedom temporarily, but with one of the most conspicuous getaway vehicles one could possibly bring to mind, it didn't last long. Both the inmates and their accomplices were in police custody within hours. This incident, which took place in Romania, plays on the security footage like a comedy of errors. Two men are being escorted from a courthouse to a police van, but they're not so anxious to go back to jail. One of them decides to make a break for it by hopping over the fence, and the officer escorting him quickly gives chase, leaving the door wide open and completely forgetting about the second man in his custody. After mulling it over for a moment, the second man says the heck with it and makes a break for it as well. The two men run in opposite directions, and their poor escort can't split himself in half. He goes after the first man, but by the time reinforcements arrive, including what appears to be a courthouse cleaning lady armed with a broom, they're both long gone. One of the men was recaptured later in the day, but the other is apparently in the wind, and their escort just might be out of a job. Oklahoma convict Joe Green produced another bit of unintentional comedy when he decided to bolt from a medical appointment rather than go back to the big house, where he was serving a 5-year sentence for drug possession and assault with a weapon. A nearby motorist shot video as Green came sprinting by on the sidewalk, barefoot and in his bright orange county jumpsuit, with an exasperated deputy in pursuit. Incredibly, despite sticking out like a sore thumb, Green managed to elude recapture for an entire half hour, but he ran directly to his previous home, which is presumably the first place officers checked, and he was back in custody with an additional charge of escaping a county jail before long.